Let's talk death from the skies and the new Codex Space Marines with a review of the jump Intercessors and how well these Primaris assault troops are shaping up to do in game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video we're going to do a focus review of the jump pack Intercessors, very similar to your standard assault Intercessors, but faster. In the video let's talk over their models, go through their datasheet and rules in the new book, their damage output, and the ways that I'll be thinking about using them in game, and any support that they can get from chapters and detachments. These jump pack Intercessors are perhaps one of the more interesting units Games Workshop has released a full multi-part kit for recently. These guys are essentially Primaris Assault Marines, a fairly direct update, and led to the Assault Squad being phased out. I think it has been a gap in the Primaris range basically ever since they came out. One thing that Space Marines are certainly famed for are their jump infantry, bounding through the skies and over dense terrain on bursts of fire, before alighting with all the grace of an angry meteorite, ready to dispense the Emperor's justice with chainsword and bolt pistol. In general, for most online discussion, I think that the new miniatures have been relatively well received. They certainly look the part and are basically just a fairly straightforward update on the Assault Squad kit. It was kind of a shame that they lost a few options. You can't take the big Eviscerator chainsword anymore, and they have lost the Flamer upgrade within the squad, though I feel like the miniatures are quite nice looking ones and fairly dynamic. Their price from Games Workshop is £35, €45 or $60. They may be seen as a little bit pricey for what they are perhaps. Lots of Games Workshop 5-man box sets often tend to be in this kind of price bracket. They've got a fairly bad points per dollar ratio of around about 1.5. In the comments I've seen quite a lot of people saying that you could just convert these from regular Assault Intercessors if you wanted a budget option. If you've got some spare Firstborn jump packs you could convert them without too much effort really. They would be a slightly different aesthetic but not too much. And weirdly enough, you can even do that through Games Workshop's own offerings that they've got on their web store. They still sell an upgrade pack with a bunch of jump packs. If you bought 10 of those alongside an Assault Intercessor squad, then you'd work out to be around about £5 per model rather than £7 for these guys. So bear in mind that's an option if you want to get quite a lot of these together slightly on the cheap. As ever, if you were looking to pick up the models and support Auspex Tactics, then I do have a few affiliate links for discounters linked down in the video description. Element Games has them at 15% off, and Gap Games in Australia at 20%. If you were picking some of these up anyway, any you bought through there do help support the channel and keep these videos coming. Getting onto their datasheet in Codex Space Marines though, and their unit name is actually slightly different to their kit name. In the Codex they're called Assault Intercessors with Jump Packs, though I must admit this does feel like a bit of a wordy title really. Jump Pack Intercessors maybe feels like a bit more of a clean name than this. But in any case, at the moment in the Codex they're listed at 90 points per 5 of them, and you can take 5 to 10 models in a squad. It is quite a big decrease on the previous Assault Marines that were in the index. They were 115 points per 5 models. When Games Workshop revealed that they would be called Intercessors, I was wondering whether or not they'd have the things that the other Intercessors have, so battle line and objective control too. But it seems that despite the name, Games Workshop is very much just treating these the same as regular assault squads. They aren't battle line and only have objective control 1, and basically have the same sort of stat line as a regular assault intercessor, but objective control 1, movement 12 and fly. For their points cost of 90, I feel like that's really quite a good start for this kind of cost. They're certainly a fair bit faster than most Space Marines, and their durability really isn't too bad. 18 points per Marine body is kind of fine, and fairly standard across quite a lot more slower models in the Codex. Weapons-wise, they're equipped with pistols and chainswords. Most of them have the heavy bolt pistols, so that's 18 inches, strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1. That's a small upgrade compared with the standard bolt pistols that the Assault Squad used to have. And while we might have lost things like Flamers and the Eviscerator in the squad, you can still take 1 extra plasma pistol per 5 if desired. That's pretty much a flat upgrade given the strength 7 and AP -2, and it could be worth overcharging against the right target, particularly 2-wound Space Marines. The Sergeant gets to swap out his heavy bolt pistol for either a hand flamer or a plasma pistol. I think both of those are kind of fine really, and the choice isn't really the most impactful in the world. Again, I'd probably be most tempted by the plasma pistol, though perhaps even a bit more reluctant to overcharge that one, given that you really don't want to lose the fancy melee weapon that he has. For their close combat weapons, each of these guys strikes home with 4 attacks with their chainswords, strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1, the standard profile there, so good against lighter infantry like toughness 3 things, kind of okay against Space Marines, will struggle against anything tougher. And the Sergeant has the option of either a power fist or power weapon to replace that with, both of which are pretty much auto-include upgrades. The Power Sword gets 4 attacks, though I think in reality almost everyone's going to want the Power Fist for 3. Going up to Strength 8 and Damage 2 definitely helps them out against more medium and heavy infantry type targets, which the rest of the squad might struggle with. Finally, the squad's special rule is somewhat similar to the Assault Marine rule, but is actually a little bit toned down. It keeps the same sort of spirit, in that it's a mortal wound impact hit when you complete a charge against an enemy unit, but it is a bit more restrictive. Previously you just roll 1 dice per model for the entire unit, now you only roll 1 dice per model that's actually made it into engagement range, which is often going to be quite a lot less. For each 4+ that you roll on those dice, you generate 1 mortal wound, so if you've got a squad of 5 of these guys and you manage to get them all into engagement range on the charge, you're averaging around about 2 or 3 mortal wounds there. That is going to be quite nice and maybe give them a small boost if they're charging from fairly close in. If they are charging out of deep strike or making other long charges though, often you're just not going to have all of these guys in engagement range, and you might miss out on a bit of damage. Overall though, really quite a lot to like about these guys, really quite cheap and quite fast. They're not going to be your mainline damage dealers to take out blocks of Terminators or heavy vehicles, at least not for the most part, though you might be able to get a bit closer to that if you supported them with characters in a big unit potentially. For their damage and defense, as mentioned, I feel like 18 points per marine body is really quite good. It's perhaps surprisingly good for one that moves 12 inches in a turn. If we're going by Games Workshop's digital points for things like Intercessors, they're only 85 points, so only very slightly cheaper. And even the cheapest standard Space Marines in the core Codex are only 80 points for the regular Assault Intercessors, so these guys really aren't so far behind. For a rough idea of what damage they can do for a squad of 5 with a Power Fist, these are the numbers that you'd expect with 1 maximal charge, where every single model makes it into engagement range to trigger their chance of mortal wounds. As you can see, they absolutely do a number on most light infantry units, wiping out an entire squad of 10 termagants on average. The flurry of chainswords are still really quite good against things like Space Marines, and the Power Fist does well against there. Against standard sized Space Marines you kill around about 3 or 4 of them, which I think is quite impressive for just a unit of 5. Against Terminators they're still not awful. 1 or 2 of them slain from lightish jump infantry I don't think is too bad, though the damage output here is very heavily mortal wound dependent. More than half of their damage comes from the mortal wound impact hits, so if you're not getting maximal amounts of those then that's going to drop off quite a lot. Against vehicles, they average around about 4 wounds to a save 3+ vehicle. Again, that's heavily mortal wound dependent though. Overall, I feel like it's quite a good offering for 90 points, definitely more than capable of bullying light to medium infantry. Going to struggle against heavies, but if you can arrange it so they make a fairly short charge, they can perhaps have a bigger impact than you might expect. Before getting into any detachment buffs or character support or things, my first thought with using these guys in more competitive lists would be to just use them as a small nuisance squad type role. 90 points for 5 infantry with deep strike and fast movement is really quite good for bounding around the board doing secondaries and skirmishing with enemy lighter infantry units. Putting a unit of 5 of these in deep strike means that you could try and get to certain areas of the board that you need to be for certain secondaries, things like deep striking in the corners to investigate some signals, or into the backfield for behind enemy lines. At 90 points and OK durability, I feel like they're good enough for that. Their good movement also means they could come down in a bit of a weird place and not be completely out of the fight. 12 inches should hopefully allow them to threaten the charge on something at least. Otherwise, just having them run up the flanks of the board is quite nice just for some cheap skirmish units that could be good for scrapping with outlying enemy units. Their good movement should mean that they've got a good chance of just bounding from cover to cover and not getting shot along the way, and then when they do engage the enemy, odds on they're going to be the ones doing the charging and the first damage to the enemy squad that they contact rather than the other way around. And as you could see from the numbers before, they're more than capable of wiping out or crippling most lighter infantry units. They do seem quite well placed for being a fairly cheap unit that could maybe jump onto a primary objective, kill the enemy unit that was there trying to take it, and then perhaps be a good trading unit where the opponent has to counter-attack and take them down with something else, exposing them to perhaps more heavier blows from your own army. For that reason, I'd maybe be a little bit wary of going too heavy on things like character investment. I feel like perhaps the first way to run them would just be in 5-man squads without too much support. They do seem quite well suited to that. Perhaps for this kind of role, one of their biggest competitors might actually be the Inceptors for just 110 points. Inceptors are fairly god tier for this kind of role given that they've got that 3-inch deep strike so can come down right next to the enemy, so they're almost impossible to screen. Definitely excellent for getting into the enemy backfield and doing any objectives that you need to do there, and hopefully clearing enemy units along the way. I feel like it perhaps doesn't have to be an either or thing though. You could maybe have your secondary needs covered by 1 unit of these guys and 1 unit of Inceptors to strike at opportune targets or to get those points exactly in the right place. Otherwise though, for basic unit support, Oath of Moment as ever will help them out a bit on the damage front. Definitely a little bit less relevant though than if it had 4 wound rerolls for the chainswords. That would have helped them punch up a bit more against the toughest stuff. For generic stratagems, Rapid Ingress is certainly awesome. That could be a good way to try and ensure that a unit gets a short charge on an enemy unit for lots of mortal wounds. Drop them somewhere that's safe, just out of line of sight, and then bound them up the board 12 inches to hopefully make a short charge in your own turn, and then hopefully get all of those nice mortal wounds. Rapid Ingress is great, it just depends on whether or not it might be better placed on something else, like maybe a Terminator Squad deep striking. I feel like the grenade stratagem might be worth a special mention for these guys, maybe more so than most. Their damage output isn't bad, but it's kind of limited. Their biggest advantage is that they can get some damage more or less where you need it on the board, and already bring perhaps a fair amount of mortal wounds to the fight. If you could budget for a grenade stratagem, plus also their mortal wound impact hits when they charge in, even a small unit could be averaging something about 6 mortal wounds on any enemy target. Never mind any power fist or chainsaw damage. That feels like it could be at least fairly brutal for an enemy unit that didn't think that they had to worry about these guys. You'd be odds on to kill around about 2 or 3 Terminators if you could budget a grenade even with this small squad. Otherwise, things like re-rolling charges is going to be big if it depends on whether or not you kill a vital enemy unit claiming an objective, and Armour of Contempt is always handy for Space Marines as a reactive durability buff in the right situation. For leader choices, out of core Codex Space Marines, there's 3 main ones for the Assault Intercessors with jump packs. There is of course the new and snazzy Captain with jump pack. He's 95 points in the Codex, down a bit from 100 in the Index. He's a 5 wound character who has a similar sort of war gear choice to the Sergeant out of the Assault Intercessors. The choice between Power Fist and Sword is quite a lot closer for him though. He actually gets a Relic Blade with a damage characteristic of 2, so for things where you are wounding on 2s or 3s already either way, it won't make too much difference and it'll be superior to the Power Fist. I still think it's probably worth losing the 1 attack to get Strength 8 though. He can also take a paired Thunderhammer and Relic Shield, which also seems pretty good. 5 attacks with a Thunderhammer, but only hitting on 3s. You do get devastating wounds for that though, which is rather nice, and the Relic Shield has him go up to 6 wounds. I'd probably either take the Fist and Pistol or Hammer and Shield. In any case, his main buff for the unit is getting you Strength 5 Chainswords, which is quite a nice breakpoint. It means that you'd be wounding Space Marines on a 3+. And of course he has his Captain free Battle Tactics stratagem, which could be Armour of Contempt or something detachment specific. Feels like that would have enough value in Gladius to make it worth it. Use Armour of Contempt in the enemy turn, and potentially the Lance melee one when you charge in, even better if it's an Assault Doctrine. I feel like if you're taking a character, you probably need to be taking a 10-man squad. That'll put you up to a unit that's just shy of 300 points. Definitely could be pretty lethal on the charge though, with threatening around about 5 or 6 mortal wounds, and then potentially a massive amount of Strength 5 attacks with +1 to wound from the free battle tactic in Gladius, or various other things from other detachments. Otherwise for options, there's the Chaplain with jump pack, one of the few surviving firstborn characters. His thing is a +1 to wound rolls and the chance for some mortal wounds when fighting, both fairly good things, and he can bring another Power Fist to the table. I think for 85 points again he seems pretty reasonable on a 10-man squad, though probably too much on a 5-man squad. +1 to wound on all those chainswords is rather nice. I think I might rate him just a tiny bit behind the Captain, though it depends whether you're using a Captain elsewhere to use the stratagems and what detachment you're in for the free stratagems. Otherwise, for the core Codex characters, you could also take Kavan Shrike as well. He's 105 points in the digital points, and I feel like out of the characters, he's probably one of the most exciting, though if you're running Raven Guard, you can't take characters from other chapters, of course. He contributes a whole load of re-rolling wounds melee with damage too, but his biggest thing for the unit is that he gives them lone operative type shooting protection. It means that the opponent just can't shoot them out of 12 inches whatsoever, so it keeps them very safe as they're moving into the battle. Plus he can teleport the unit on and off the board, which could be handy for keeping them relevant and keeping them threatening enemy units. Might be a little bit risky for long charges out of Deep Strike though. He also brings the Phobos keyword now as well, which could be pretty exciting in the Vanguard Spearhead to use some stratagems a bit better on the Assault Intercessor type units. Talking of detachments, I feel like a few of them maybe stand out above the rest for these new jump pack guys. I still think that the Gladius Task Force is going to be a pretty reasonable choice for them. 1 command point can allow them to advance and charge, so some big strike range there. And as mentioned, they've got that Lance melee stratagem with extra AP and Assault Doctrine as well. That seems fairly solid value if you're just trying to win a really key fight with a unit that they could potentially kill, but just need a little bit more oomph on those chainswords. I'm sure people will be interested to use these in the Stormlance Task Force. It mainly has support for bike units, but even just the core benefit of advance and charge all the time is pretty excellent, and with a skirmishy type unit that's likely to be scrapping with other units, having fallback and charge could actually be quite big as well. It also gives you a reactive movement type stratagem of 6 inches, that could be quite nice to keep them safe in a surprising move, and if you're using a character-led squad, there's one enhancement that allows you to re-roll advanced rolls that could give them a pretty reliable enormous strike range into combat that average around about a 24-inch threat range. Finally, I think perhaps one of the other really interesting ones is the Vanguard Spearhead. -1 to hit and cover is pretty handy at range to keep them safe. These often do feel like they're a unit that would want to be operating on the flanks and staying out of range of enemy guns as best as possible. There's a stratagem that could allow them to return to reserves, which is quite fun for deep strike units. Strike could grant the units Phobos, or if you use one of the generic characters to run them, they could be an interesting option for that big infiltration enhancement. Have them start in the midfield and get an almost guaranteed first turn charge on something your opponent doesn't want them to be into. That could be fairly terrifying with the 12-inch movement that they have to both threaten really quite a long distance and maybe hit fairly hard with the mortal wound impact hits. In general though, I think they're solid enough just to run in any detachment. A few of the others have some minor benefits, like Firestorm Assault giving you slightly better shooting, and the option for that Crucible of Battle for +1 to wound, and the Ironstorm Spearhead gives you a single reroll, could be nice on those Plasma Pistols or Power Fists. Finally, for the more divergent chapters, I think we're waiting on a little bit of errata for them. Currently a bunch of the Blood Angels characters say that they can join Assault Marines, but they technically need an errata to be able to join the Assault Intercessors with jump packs now they're a different unit, though I'm sure Games Workshop will fix that in short order. I think jump pack guys are generally going to be pretty relevant to Blood Angels given their good support for them. The detachment can have them hitting extra hard in melee with +1 strength and attack, both really relevant for mass chainswords, and I've got a fair few stratagems and things for better support in melee. Dante and Sanguinary Priest, if they can join the unit, both will be pretty interesting. Maybe the Sanguinary Priest in particular for a 5+ Feel No Pain type saving the unit an extra AP. That seems like good value all around. Does kind of depend on whether or not you're more tempted to build around Death Company or Sanguinary Guard though. These guys are very significantly cheaper than those though. Otherwise, Black Templars, like most of the Vows, they can have extra damage or durability with the Feel No Pain. There's a stratagem to lock enemy units in melee, which is quite big. And Space Wolves are kind of similar, could be a bit more of a cheap distraction type unit to mob around the flanks while Thunderwolves take the main charge. If you're playing Champions of Rust, then they like most of the sagas if you can manage to activate them, and they do have a lance melee stratagem and some gamey consolidation shenanigans, which are quite helpful for objective taking units. Overall, if they do remain at the price tag of 90 points, they do seem quite solid. Seem like they'd be good utility units for a Space Marine army, though probably not to the point where they're absolute auto-include or anything. Space Marines do have an awful lot of ways to accomplish similar sort of jobs. I'd probably be most tempted by just a unit or two to either start in deep strike or run up the flanks, skirmish with enemy troops if it's relevant, and maybe jump down to do secondary objectives. Look for opportunities to either bully isolated units or trade up and make sure that the opponent has to expose something far more important to deal with them. As mentioned, I think it could be quite fun if they ever manage to surprise a really elite enemy unit with some mortal wounds and a grenade stratagem and hack down a whole load of them more than you might have guessed. I still think they could probably work with a bigger unit with a buffing character, would usually cost you somewhere between 250 and 300 points. That could be an interesting sort of option for a rapid ingress type threat, bring them down somewhere safe, and then get to move and make a near guaranteed charge in your own turn. Shrike does seem particularly fun with them, with their lone operative style buffs and jumping on and off the board. For their objective taking role, I guess the main competitors are things like Inceptors, Phobos Marine starting forward, or the very nice Calidus Assassin with her redeploys. Probably at a similar sort of level of utility as these guys, though I wouldn't say strictly better, they just do different things. I'd say that probably with the 90 points cost, they probably beat the Vanguard Veterans at 105 points. These ones have the advantage of getting you Storm Shields and Strength 5 melee hits with lethal hits, though it does come with a trade-off of losing the Mortal Wound impact hits and the Power Fists, plus just being a cheaper unit is kind of nice for being expendable and not having to worry about them too much. I think at first reads I'd probably rate the Jump Pack Intercessors over the Vanguard Vets, though realistically there's not a massive amount in it. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the unit. Would you be tempted to use these in your Space Marine list going forward? How strong do you think they'll be in game overall? Look forward to hearing all your thoughts and ideas on them down in the comments below. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll hopefully be keeping going with a few more Space Marine unit reviews and detachment reviews over the next week, so subscribe or check back later for them. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, or you'd like to help support and keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.